The one person in the world who can fire me is going to be interviewing me, asking me questions. So if you fire me by the end of this, what are we going to do?
Rock and roll. I'm giving you a no firing during the podcast guarantee.
All right, welcome back to another edition of the Business of Betting podcast. I'm your host, in-game senior analyst Jeff Edelstein. We decided to do something a little bit different. We decided to have Adam Small on. Adam, of course, is been in this business a very long time, but we're not going to talk about Adam because Adam, my boss at Third Planet, we decided that this was going to be that somehow we all decided the brilliant idea was going to be this. The one person in the world who can fire me is going to be interviewing me, asking me questions. So I don't know whose idea this was or how we decided on it, but I've been realizing that this was a horrible idea, but I'm here, Adam, you're there. So go ahead, ask me whatever you want. And then that's it. If you fire me by the end of this, what are we going to do?
Rock and roll. I'm giving you a no firing during the podcast guarantee. So should go without stating. But all right, I'm excited for this. I used to host the Pocket Fives podcast 20 years ago and used to interview people. It's been a long time. So this is fun. And I went through a few topics. The way I wanted to do this today, Jeff, is I've been thinking about the period since PASPA went down, which has been about 8 years now, since 2018. And more or less, I think we came into each other's worlds around this same time, originally via an email you sent to Cal Spears, and eventually it ended up on my desk. And I think, if I remember right, you did sort of like some freelance part-time stuff for a while, and then we hired you around 2020, something like that, full-time. But we've known each other about this amount of time. You know, you are an enthusiast of all things gaming, and whether it's Lucky Larry's Lobster Mania or DFS, Best Ball, you know it all. So nothing off limits there. So, all right, let's just start with kind of big picture, Jeff. We went through this period. We had 2018, PASPA went down, a bunch of states legalized within the next couple of years. States as diverse as Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Tennessee, Oregon, all doing it in different ways, whether it was single provider or whatever. We had some strange things going on, like in Illinois, where they sort of kept going back and forth on whether online was allowed or not. Florida with the tribes and the Hard Rock. But we got to where we are today, mostly through exuberance and growth and spread of regulated sports betting. And now it seems like a lot of regret and retreading, whether it's on tax rates, whether it's on states even considering possibly like trying to shrink the market, or there just seems to be a lot of regret, both in the media, public sphere, but also even among government officials. So what's going on? What's the lay of the land?
Well, I think that, politicians and the like, I think they see sports betting, well, a few different ways. I think that, it's sinful for starters, right? And they kind of, lob it in there with booze and cigarettes, with the idea being, well, we can tax this as much as we want because it's a sin tax, basically. The problem with it, though, is that, sports betting, I think, as every state legislature is finding out, is not the golden goose that they thought it was going to be. It's more like, if anything, maybe a bronze goose, there's tax dollars coming in, but it's not solving any problems for any states. It is drop in the bucket material. Then New York comes around, throws down a 51% tax rate, which they know they can get away with because if you're a sports book, you got to be in New York. So New York's doing all right. They're making $1 billion a year through sports betting, and other states are looking at it being like, man, we should be making money like that. So even states like my home state of New Jersey, which has long been held up by pros, regulators, and, a lot of people tangentially involved in the industry, as a state that did it right, kind of like more or less wide open, dozens of different sports books that, players could use, reasonable tax rate for the operator. Well, that's changed. They've upped the tax rate here. I'm sure they're not done raising the tax rate. It hasn't been the boon for gamblers either. I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but if you show a pulse at the regulated books, you're going to find yourself limited or asked to leave. Yeah, I think looking back, with hindsight being what it is, I think there's a lot of things that could have been done differently at the jump, but it was, it felt like a gold rush for everybody. And it kind of was at the beginning. And now I think, there's a little bit of a hangover, when it's all said and done. And obviously, nobody saw sweepstakes upsetting the apple cart. Nobody saw prediction markets certainly upsetting the apple cart. So, this whole conversation in another 8 years is going to be wildly different.
It definitely does not feel like a gold rush now. We're talking about regulated sports betting. I think everyone thought eventually online casino would be the next big thing that really blew the top off, but that hasn't really happened. It definitely feels much more like a tightening, restrictive, like starting to pick at the margins, thinking about squeezing blood out of a turnip, whatever, analogy you want to make. It does not feel like a gold rush today. So that's a big change in my mind. Moving away from just regulatory stuff, I'm going to come back to it, but I wanted to talk about something that happened really early on in the regulated space that was an event that caught my eye a lot. Maybe it's because I'm a community builder. I have always enjoyed businesses that built communities and just watching how these things come up. DraftKings put together this, I believe it was called the Sports Betting National Championship in New Jersey. I was really personally excited about it. I didn't participate, but I knew a lot of people that did. And for me, that was the start of something big. It reminded me of poker tournaments and DFS live finals and just all these things that can be so exciting to get to like go be in person somewhere, compete in a competition, but also socialize with other people from the same background that maybe you wouldn't run into otherwise. It seemed to actually go rather poorly in a lot of ways. For those who don't know or remember, Rufus Peabody was in the lead late in this competition. He had a winning bet that had not been graded, although it was for sure a winner. And for whatever reason, DraftKings or the event people took too long to grade the bet. And he wasn't able to get his next wager in before the deadline. And someone else won a wager and passed him. Actually, two people did because he ended up getting third place. And, he won $300-something thousand instead of $1 million that he could have won had his next wager won and he got first. But also, beyond that, it just seems like there were a lot of complaints, a lot of concerns about like uncertainty around the rules and not so level playing field. What did you think? Were you excited about that? Like I was, Jeff? Did you think that was going to be a thing like that we were going to be seeing more of?
Without the benefit of having my calendar in front of me, I'll go as far to call that the high watermark of legalized sports betting in America post-PASPA, in that I believe you could win your way or buy your way into this tournament, if I remember correctly. I wonder how many of the people that played in that tournament, and I'm not passing judgment on DraftKings, every sports book does this, but I wonder how many of those players that were playing then can get a $5 bet down on the site today, right? So, I'm sure there was a moment in time when everyone had their account wide open and you were welcomed with open arms and bonus money was flying around and again, using the gold rush term, and this probably was the high watermark of it all, right? Where it was it felt, maybe blame the marketing, maybe blame my own, being naive, but it felt like you could really make a fortune just betting on sports, and have a blast doing it.
Yeah. I used to go to every state that had legalized since I'd last been to that state. I'd, have a plan to open accounts and make sure I got sometimes it was $1,000 per site and you can just sign up for 10 new sites. And you were getting so much value just out of joining. It had to end, right? Remember Caesars in New York? I think it was $5,000, risk-free, but still it's a lot of value for someone. Yeah. And you're right. Yeah, it did. It's totally different feeling. This is all uphill from here, right? At the time. But do you see these events coming back? You did make a good point about the disconnect with the customers. These aren't even the customers that are getting action on these sites anymore. How can you have an event for the best of the best when you're not even looking to have those as customers?
Yeah, it would be nice if and DraftKings of all, I know DraftKings catches so many strays and so much shit, but as far as all the gambling companies, I put them as number one, if only because they're constantly willing to try new stuff. They're constantly, creating new products. I've forgotten more of the things that they've launched than there are currently out there. So yeah, why not, Jason Robbins? Why don't we do something else? How about for the common man? A little sports betting kind of tournament action going, But yes, why not do something like that?
Or maybe you base it on something like a contest with sports betting on the site. You have an NFL contest, a pick 'em or something, and the top 100 winners end up kind of like a DFS live final, right?
Sure. Well, yeah, there's no reason why. Well, I should have said there's no reason why some company can't do it. I'm sure some company is doing it. I'm just not aware of it. But why not create a DFS site? I love DFS, where I'm picking, the Mets minus 300, and that's going to cost me, five imaginary dollars or whatever the case may be. And I build a betting card around it. And, whoever does the best does the best. I'm sure it's out there. I'm sure somebody's tried it, but I do think that there is still room for invention, in this space. And yeah, I do think part of it, going back to your original thought on this, I do think a big part of it, cracking the code on community, right? You have like, individual discords and things like that, but like, just a place where, I don't know, just cracking that code to community. I'm not sure anyone's necessarily done it just yet.
I'm with you. I think it's so powerful when you are able to bring people together that want to get together for the sake of getting together, but also participate in this activity. Poker had a lot of success with that. And I think no one has really figured it out in sports betting yet. And along the lines of community, let's talk about the gambling community. And when I say gambling community, I mean more like the people that are around gambling all the time, everyone knows of Captain Jack or Rufus or all these guys, but there are more people than that have been around gambling forever, whether it's as an operator or a business person or a bettor. I mean, how are they receiving all this change? Like you went to the blackjack ball, you seem like people actually like you in this community. They want you around, even though you're a journalist, and seem willing to talk to you. I mean, how does it look for these people's point of view? Because just before you answer, what I imagine, and maybe it just goes back to my poker background, is that it's like all these old time poker pros that used to play the World Series of Poker when it was 200 people playing the main event, just kind of watching with eyes wide open as the fields turned into 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 players. And they're these old, mostly men that are used to, a very different environment than they all of a sudden find themselves in. And all of them kind of view it as mostly a good thing. There are more players, more money to be made, but also like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Like, I wonder if it's similar with sports bettors.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'm speaking very generally here. I would imagine the vast majority of we'll call them pros. I think it's a double-edged sword, right? I think there's more ways to get your money down. There's more ways to use your money. There's more ways to bet. At the same time, I think, the sharpness has risen on the other side of the counter, because now these companies, they're not just dealing with 10, 12, 20, 100, 300 people, right? That they know. They're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people. Captain Jack tells a great story about how back in the day, 20 years, 25 years ago, virtually every Major League Baseball game had the same home run prop, 1.5, right? And Captain Jack discovered, well, obviously when the wind's blowing out in Wrigley, it's going to be, the number should be higher. And he beat the shit out of it. It's unfathomable to me today, something like that could ever slip through. I mean, it is so rare to see bad lines, really. You know what I'm saying? Or, mispriced lines. Or it's so rare to have an operator on the casino side, leave open a way to take advantage, and it's harder for the advantage players, I'm sure. I think it's just harder for everybody. But at the same time, there's more ways to do it. There's more venues, there's more options, and there's certainly more money in the pool, right?
Yeah, no doubt. So back on industry and regulation a bit more, Jeff. Something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, for whatever reason, everyone's talking about prediction markets, and I'm sure we're going to get into it today. But I was hanging around. I was living in Atlanta back in 2018 when PASPA went down, and a startup that everyone knows now that was based in Atlanta was Prize Picks. I'm friends with the founders, was around them a lot during that time, and I remember specifically that they launched Prize Picks. They had a business called Side Prize, but when they rebranded it and launched what the people know of today as Prize Picks, was October of 2018, I believe, right around October 2018. They had a big launch party and everything. And I thought the time is very interesting because Prize Picks has never been regulated under the sports betting regulatory regime. I don't believe in a single state that has sports betting regulation or they are regulated betting operator. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But the timing is very interesting, right? Because you had a long period of time where you had people were very hesitant to launch real money gaming businesses in the US. You had the DFS thing, but it was very narrow. It was pretty much all salary cap games and, something close to that. But Prize Picks launched 2018, Underdog launched in 2020. A bunch of other companies have launched like that. Notably, a lot of these companies are launched by people younger than me. And now we have, Novig and, Kalshi and all this stuff. But I mean, I think one of the narratives that I was always hearing back in, call it 2015, 2016, 2017, leading up to PASPA going down, was that, most of this activity would be brought under this new regulatory regime or regulatory regimes in the various states. And if anything, it's really been the opposite. Entrepreneurs seem to have become much more inspired to create products that are, outside of those regulatory regimes. They're attempting, at least trying to, if not actually following US laws, operating within the US. They're not offshore operators. They're not, in some jurisdiction where they can't be touched. And I'm wondering if that's something of interest to you, like how that's gone down that way, how like all these young people saw betting. Maybe it was just that betting became so forefront in people's minds as they watch sports that people started having more ideas around it. I mean, do you think it's related to PASPA going down? Just a coincidence?
I think it has more to do with the DFS legalization push, right? Imagine a world where DFS loses state by state by state, right? And it's determined that it is gambling and there is no workaround for it. I'm not sure that you see these other, if you see the Prize Picks and the Kalshis and all them being as, bullish to start something, start something else. Because, one of my pet peeves of this industry is, traditional daily fantasy sports, man. That is a skill game. That's peer to peer. And, DFS 2.0, no, this is a skill game. This is not gambling. And buying an event contract on the Yankees to win a baseball game tonight, no, that's trading. That's F all of you. It's gambling. And like everyone knows it's gambling. And like we do this dance that we've been doing now since DFS to say what is and what isn't gambling when we all know that if you are putting money down with the anticipation and expectation of making more money, you, my friend, are gambling, right? The fact that, and I think America is uniquely situated to allow for us to have this insane round and round conversation about what is and what is not gambling, because nothing is regulated at the federal level. This is all state by state by state by state by state. So you better believe, I'd love to see some state go to Kalshi, let's say, and say, all right, we're going to legalize you. We're going to tax you at 5%. You have nothing to ever worry about in Idaho. Just say that you're gambling.
And to see where that leads to. Yeah, I mean, well, so I would say, I guess, just like, and I agree with you that it seems preposterous sometimes, the arguments that you hear being made, whether it's, in the public sphere, the legal sphere, whatever it is. At the same time, I have sympathy, and I know you do as well, Jeff, like for the people who have creative ideas to create products that aren't out there yet, but aren't able to fit them in any way to existing regulatory regimes, right? And this happened with online poker. I mean, it happened with DFS. All of these different products emerged in environments where there was no legal way to ever launch this product. And all of the incumbents who had all the political power were against it ever existing because they're more concerned with sort of protecting their own bottom lines, some more than others. But mostly, I think we kind of heard the same thing from the Caesars and MGMs of the world as we heard from, the tribes and anybody else, which was, stay away. This is our turf. And so, I mean, there's a spectrum here, right? I mean, I think sometimes these products are genuinely different than what's out there. Other times it's just a way to get into a market that no one's in yet, right? I mean, I think there's definitely an argument that Kalshi and Polymarket are intending to grow via California, Texas, Georgia, whatever states, right? But I do feel some sympathy and want to be at least generous in thought to them that like the reason is lots of people have good ideas about products and most of them aren't able to make them unless they, find some way other than becoming a regulated sports book.
Yeah, well, I get it. And again, these problems would be solved if there was a federally, if all this stuff was under a federal umbrella, and there was the Department of Gambling. And you had an idea, you go to the Department of Gambling. And we're just using some pretty common sense tests here to determine whether or not this falls under gambling. And again, my common sense test is if I'm giving you $5, I'm hoping to win $9.50, it's gambling. There's just no two ways about it. So are there other ideas out there that maybe are being held back? Maybe. Are there ideas that no one's thought of yet that might be the next great form of gambling? Sure. Thank God for ChatGPT now, because if you have an idea, you could probably stick it in there and say, what state can I bring this to? And it's going to I'll have a puncher's chance of getting it through, legally.
Well, now we've got this. I mean, things have kind of reached peak insane, right? With Kalshi now raising supposedly at $40 billion valuation. Meanwhile, Flutter's market cap, and this is Flutter, everybody, is 19 billion. Last I checked, I'm not sure if that has changed since yesterday when I looked before, but let me just remind people some of the brands that Flutter owns. They are the biggest conglomerate gambling company in the world, or at least online. I think they're not as big currently in market cap as Sands, but for an online focused gaming company, they own FanDuel, which everyone knows here, but they also own Paddy Power and Betfair. The company used to be called Paddy Power Betfair. They own Skybet, they own PokerStars, which itself was sold for $5 billion at one point. Sportsbet, MaxBet, the list goes on. Flutter is enormous. They have all kinds of regional brands. They have the biggest brand in the country of Georgia. So the idea that Kalshi is currently worth more than 2 times as much as Flutter requires some imagination, right? Because Flutter has existing business and revenues that are huge. Kalshi is a trade on the future, a belief that that's going to matter several years from now, much more than these other brands that are under Flutter's regime, even though Flutter is also competing with Kalshi as a prediction market. Like, have we reached the top here yet? Because I mean, I wouldn't be touching that paper with a 10-foot pole, but obviously some smarter people than me are. I definitely don't fancy myself a better investor than Andreessen Horowitz or someone like that. So like, what is going on, Jeff? Like, what the hell is going on?
I guess the bet is that not only will prediction markets usurp sports books as the default place to place a bet, but that Kalshi will be, out of the dozens of potential operators out there, will be like the largest, biggest, last one standing. Yeah, there's a couple of leaps of faith that we're taking there, right? Leap of faith number one, that sports betting is going to continue to be allowed on prediction markets, which means that the Supreme Court, well, it means nothing happens, but something's going to happen. So does the Supreme Court act and grant them the ability to do that? Maybe. Is Congress going to get together and do that? If they are, they better hurry. What happens in 2020, in January 2029, when insert president, whoever takes the White House? Because in one of the more crazy, weird things that have happened in this country in the last few years, there is bipartisan support on both sides of the argument when it comes to prediction markets. There are Republicans who are anti-prediction markets. If Donald Trump wasn't president right now, would we be even having this conversation? There's so many different factors at play here that and they all have to hit. This is a classic 6-leg parlay that people who are investing in Kalshi are putting down. They might be right, and if they're right, they are going to be rich beyond their wildest imaginations. If they're wrong, they're wrong.
And if our 80-year-old president died tomorrow, which is a non-zero possibility, his vice president becomes president, who may be a big fan of prediction markets, but definitely doesn't seem to have the profile of someone that would be as supportive and hands-off as Trump has been to this point, right? Not even talking about the Democrats. There's just so many ways this could go wrong politically.
There are so many ways it could go wrong politically. There's so many ways it could go wrong judiciously, in the judicial system. And there's so many ways it could go wrong legislatively. Not to mention, there's just so many ways it could go wrong. Listen, I'm not in California, I'm not in Texas, but I have to imagine that if I was going to bet in 5, let's say prediction markets win, and the prediction market, you could bet sports on prediction markets. You're going to tell me that DraftKings isn't going to be the market leader in California or Texas? Come on.
And California just went to all this trouble to, make sweepstakes illegal in their state. It just feels like a matter of time. The tribes are just, hair on fire right now about this there. And I live in Florida. I started seeing pretty recently DraftKings billboards everywhere that say DraftKings now live in Florida. You've got to believe that the Seminoles and Hard Rock are not super happy about this, we'll say. I mean, it just seems like the status quo is getting upset in a way that is going to lead to a war of sorts. It's not like people are just gonna be like, okay, this is now the new normal. Based on, Victor Roach's Twitter account or whatever, I don't think people are gonna accept that this is now the new normal.
Yeah, I mean, right, the splinterings here, it seems to be land-based versus online versus prediction markets, but some online are with the prediction markets, some online are obviously sticking with their, corporate parents. There's no telling what tomorrow brings in all this. A lot of, people jumping into bed with other people that you didn't expect. I mean, just look at DraftKings and FanDuel through the years. hated by brick and mortar, welcomed by brick and mortar, hated by brick and mortar again. Like it goes, the circle keeps spinning.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm curious in my mind, I believe that there has to be something resembling an equilibrium that we reach at some point with all this, because I don't think it can go on like this for another 10 years or like let's say another 25 years, where you just have every time you get a market leader, then someone else comes in under a completely new or non-existent regulatory regime and completely blows them out of the water by not following all the rules that they're following. I mean, DraftKings were the kamikaze people 10 years ago. They were the ones willing to like completely blanket the airwaves with their ads and like didn't care what anyone thought. They were going for it all the way. And now they're like the buttoned up corporate, like we're the incumbents, they are now. I mean, Jason looks very different now than he looked 10 years ago and sounds different, right? And I'm not criticizing either way. It's just, I mean, clearly we're in this sort of cycle where every time you get established, you get regulated more tightly, and then someone comes in and creates something that is much less regulated and upsets the status quo. And I wonder where it all lands. Like, does one company own everything? Does Kalshi become the Amazon of sports betting? Or I don't know. Is all this good for America, Jeff? Like, let's get like really macro here. Like, are we all better off now? I think I like gambling. I want gambling to be available. Is the way things are going making things better?
No, they're not. And not to say that it can't be or shouldn't be, but, I've told this story more than once. I'll say it again. I have a 17-year-old son. I saw from an early age that he, got a little bit of wild child in him. And, I sat him down and I said, listen, man, a little bit of weed's not going to kill you, but don't do like powder pills, all this other shit. Right. But, whatever. A couple of beers isn't going to kill you, but you don't want to be drinking like 12 shots of vodka, like moderation in this stuff. But you don't want to get involved with like heavy drugs, obviously. That, that stuff can take you down a very dark path. We literally just, I know we're taping this ahead of time, but just last night, he was talking to me about Kalshi and how like keeps seeing this one guy pop up on his TikTok feed, how you can make money on Kalshi. And I'm like, you're not going to make money on Kalshi. I'm like, you are not going to make money. I'm not going to. You need to, and so what's being sold to this generation of people, we'll call them like age 14 to 25, is easy money in the streets. All you got to do is pick it up. No one is telling them. My son he was a junior in high school. He's had driver's ed. They tell you not to drive fast. Sex ed, wear a condom. Health class, don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs. There's no word about gambling.
Yeah, there's got to be. That's going to have to be brought into schools, right?
But we're losing this generation to it because it is wide open right now. You look at my son's TikTok, it is gambling ad after gambling ad, tout after tout after tout after tout, saying, come join, the Bling Blong Casino, which is based on fucking Mars or wherever. And, they have no knowledge. And man, it looks easy, right? And I know how easy it is to get sucked in, right? And to go down like that rabbit hole and to find yourself like, oh shit, I did not anticipate losing that much money today. You know what I mean? And I know what I'm doing. What about these 18-year-olds who don't?
Jeff, you just stumbled on a great business vertical for Elon and SpaceX. They can put a regulatory regime for gambling on Mars. I think we should get ahead of that one.
Not the worst idea. I'm shaking my head. Yes.
I have, as of last week, I have a teenager. My oldest son turned 13. I've got two other kids that are, not far behind. And I think about this a lot. I find myself explaining to them a lot about what they're seeing on TV because we watch a lot of sports together. My kids don't have social media yet. They don't have phones yet, but we watch live sports. We've been watching the World Cup, and there's just like one Kalshi, Polymarket, ADI Predict Street, whatever's out there, one ad after another. I heard today that ADI Predict Street paid $150 million to get their name plastered all over all the World Cup stuff. And I think that's a good way for me to tell my kids, why to be maybe a little cautious about it. They're paying that much. It's coming from somewhere, they're expecting customers to come on there and lose money, lots and lots of it. And, you can say, oh, well, yeah, poker sites used to say this. Oh, we don't make money off losing players. We make money off the rake. Well, you know what? It's coming from somewhere. It's people depositing money and withdrawing less. That's the only way the sites get money, whether they're taking fees, losses, whatever. The money comes from the people who deposit and lose, whether it's peer-to-peer or against the house. And I think people need to have that straight in their heads. The money is coming from the losing players, and it's lots and lots and lots of money. I love gambling. I am very into a wide range of gambling products, whether it's, the prize picks underdog type stuff. I know you are. Yeah. Sports betting, poker. I probably would dabble in predictions on non-sports stuff, although I'm cautious about all the insider stuff going on with it. But I worry for the kids because you're right. It's becoming very culturally ingrained. I think the culture of young people is much more like, maybe it's not such a good idea to go invest in college education and go get a job. Maybe it's better to just find some edge, whatever that edge is out there. And a lot of them are going to fall on their faces doing it. And I think it's going to be, I predict, if you want me to make a prediction, I predict that schools are going to start tackling this because someone's got to. What it would give me a crazy prediction, Jeff. Is Kalshi going to buy like the win or something, like something off the wall? What's going to happen that nobody called except for Jeff?
Oh man, a prediction that nobody's called except for me. Gosh. Well, I mean, I guess I kind of touched on this. I think if prediction markets do become like allowed sports betting wise, if sports betting survives and it is prediction markets, I think that the existing DraftKings, FanDuel, one of them will look up in 5 years, that'll be the leaders. Just like everyone thought that like the Caesars and the MGMs were going to dominate the online sports betting at launch. And it was DraftKings and FanDuel with like their long and storied lists of DFS players. I see the same thing happening. I'm working on a story right now. I don't know if it's going to be out by the time this comes out. What would today's landscape look like if California and Texas had legalized 5 years ago? Wildly different. We wouldn't be having these prediction market conversations. There wouldn't be this mad dash for things. But if there is going to be a mad dash for it in those states, I think DraftKings and FanDuel are going to win.
There's something instructive about vacuums, right? And this whole, like, I think maybe the belief in inertia in California that, the tribes or whoever's in control there can just kind of wait things out and eventually, get things their way and not believe that other people are going to go out there and fill the vacuum and find ways to make money has really been challenged. That's going to be an interesting piece. I'm looking forward to that one.
I think so far the experience at a sports book is better than the experience at a prediction market. And while I haven't played DraftKings prediction market, site or whatever, I'm quite confident it looks exactly and acts exactly like a sports book, right?
No doubt. An underdog, I mean, someone like Underdog might even be as well positioned for that, right? And
because I think these companies look at themselves as gambling companies, whereas Kalshi looks at it as it's still to this day, I believe, even though 90% of their income is coming from sports, looks at itself as a financial company, and there's just a different mindset, right? And I don't think it's going to be the right mindset if sports betting is allowed, which we'll see.
I like your thought process here. And I think there is a big difference between the sort of FanDuel, DraftKings versus MGM Caesars from the, mid 2010s versus now with predictions versus the incumbents, which is that those were really like digital first companies, FanDuel, DraftKings. They were well positioned to win a digital battle against someone like Caesars and MGM. Obviously, this is easier said in hindsight because I don't think anyone was saying, or many people were saying 2016, FanDuel and DraftKings are going to be the top sports books. But it makes sense why they became the top sports books. Whereas I don't think there's really a story to be told that Kalshi and Polymarket are positioned to do better at offering what's essentially a sports betting gambling product than someone like Underdog or DraftKings or FanDuel. And, the biggest advantage is just not having the regulatory handcuffs maybe today. That said, it could change. They could make, M&A moves or, they've already hired Polymarket, hired, Ari Bora. Like they've been big hires from the gambling world that have moved into, I think Chris Fargas is over there too. If I remember, like there's some big names that have done really well with companies like FanDuel that are now at the Polymarkets and Kalshis that may help them transition into more of a sports first topic. But yeah, they got a lot of ground to make up to be better at this than FanDuel and DraftKings. So I like it. This has been fun, Jeff. I've been enjoying mostly just listening to you hosting this show and my one appearance as well. One of my favorite podcasts I've been on lately. So, keep up the great work. You still have a job as of this moment. So
that's what I wanted to hear. That was a big takeaway for this conversation.
But no, it's been great.
Adam, thanks for joining us. Thanks for interviewing me. And to everyone else, have a great day. This has been the Business of Betting Podcast. We'll see you again next week.